An Auckland businessman has been jailed for nearly 7 years for ripping off investors to the tune of more than $1.5 million to fund an extravagant lifestyle. Stephen Robertson was found guilty of 38 theft, deception and dishonesty charges after a 10-week trial in the High Court in Auckland. His mainly elderly victims lost their life savings and in some cases have been forced to postpone their retirement and to remortgage their properties. Our court reporter Anneke Smith was at his sentencing today.
Auckland businessman Stephen Robertson was given more than $1 million to trade on his investors' behalf. Instead, he used it to fund an extravagant lifestyle, fitted out with flash cars, private jets, holidays and jewellery. The luxuries were funded by his 22 victims, most of them elderly or nearing retirement. Justice Kate said the victim impact statements made for sad reading.
They had worked hard all their lives to acquire a small nest egg. They invested with you in the hope of making a little extra money to help them in their retirement. Almost all of your victims say that they have lost trust in others as a consequence of your actions.
In August, Justice Cates found Robertson guilty of a raft of charges after a 10-week judge-alone trial. They included 23 charges of theft by person in a special relationship, 11 of obtaining by deception, and 4 of dishonestly using a document. The judge found he stole $1.2 million and roughly 270,000 Australian dollars between 2009 and 2015 through several software companies. He sold software that purported to help people trade, but it wasn't easy to use, and when confronted with disgruntled investors, Robertson offered to trade on their behalf. Instead of actually trading the money, he used it to fund a lavish lifestyle. And when he ran out of money, he simply dipped into clients' credit card accounts for more. Justice Kate said Robertson had targeted elderly, unsophisticated and vulnerable victims.
You were clearly an extremely skilled and persuasive salesman who used your considerable skills to deceive and steal from honest and trusting clients.
The court heard many of his victims had lost nest eggs they had worked their entire life to secure. One man in his 70s on the verge of retirement is now still working, and another man in his 60s has been forced to remortgage his farm. Crown Prosecutor Ben Finn said Robertson's victims were devastated. He said the defendant should not get a discount for previous good character, as it was this character he used to exploit his victims.
Many of the investors, when they gave evidence at trial and in their victim impact statements, say same things. That's how Mr. Robertson held himself out to them. His intelligence, his charisma and his attentiveness were the very qualities that enabled him to persuade these people to part with their money.
Mr. Finn said a 7-year jail term was appropriate, but Robertson's lawyer, Todd Simmons, said the offending wasn't overly sophisticated and warranted a lower starting point of 6 years.
It certainly isn't, in my submission, when one compares cases of significant fraudulent offending that come before this court, involving, as they do very often, multiple offenders.
Mr. Simmons said his client was remorseful, posed a low risk of reoffending, and there was still a hopeful prospect of reparation funds, given Robertson's assets were being liquidated. Justice Cates adopted a starting point of 7 years imprisonment and granted a 4-month discount for Robertson's remorse and willingness to make reparations. After the sentencing, FMA Head of Enforcement, Karen Chang, said it reflected not just the impact on the victims, but the financial markets.
This sort of conduct impacts on the integrity and the reputation of New Zealand's financial markets. And that's the reason why we took action in this case. Just bear in mind, Mr. Robertson, he wasn't a registered or an authorised financial advisor. But from the point of view of the victims, they thought that they were participating in the financial sector.
Justice Kate sentenced Robertson to 6 years and 8 months in jail. He will serve half that time behind bars before he is eligible for parole. Ātui te ko te matua ko Anneke Smith aho.